They call them snowbirds. The folks that travel south during the winter season, looking for some warmer weather. Specifically, the New Yorkers that want to get out of all that muck and dirtied snow and 30-degree days. So what they do is act like snowbirds. Fly down to Florida, get some warm weather. And this was always a dreaded time for the community in Florida, governed by their holy rabbi, Rabbi Beryl Wein, who used to be a Rav in Florida before he moved to Eretz Yisrael. The brilliant writer, historian, and Rav wrote in one of his most recent books an incredible vignette how his community and many of their members would always notice how all the snowbirds would come waltzing right into their community, where their sleepy, happy, and peaceful minyanim would become more rambunctious, more loud-mouthed, and more rushed because of the influx of the warm-seeking snowbirds from Brooklyn. But all in all, it wasn't a huge problem. Most of it was all in good fun and good for the economy, good for the minyan. Beroiv am hadras melech, more people at the minyan. It was mostly friendly. Except there was one individual, says the great Rabbi Beryl Wein, that the community dreaded. He would return year after year, migrating south for the warm weather. And when he would come, he would put up a big fight to make sure that he got the most prestigious aliyah in the shul on Shabbos. Seems like this fellow may have had a screw loose, or a bunch of screws loose, or perhaps the entire motherboard pulled out. But on Shabbos, he would show up and make a big scene. You make sure, Rabbi, Gabbai, that I get the prestigious either third aliyah or the sixth aliyah. Because someone of my stature is the only one fit to receive that aliyah. You may cringe as you hear those words, but this is what would happen year after year. It would become awkward. And people, and the Gabbai specifically, would refrain from walking down this man's aisle, not wanting to start up a whole fight, a whole rash, a whole machlokes. But it was very hard to handle this fellow. And one Shabbos, that this rather rambunctious and odd snowbird came to shul, the Gabbai honored him with the beautiful aliyah to approach the altar, to come forth and have the great honor of doing Pesicha, opening up the Arn Kodesh, taking the Torah out, giving it to the Gabbai, giving it to the Chazan. And all of a sudden, after he was told by the Gabbai to get that aliyah to go up and open the ark, he started an entire rally and riot. I can't believe you gave me Pesicha. You think I'm only worthy of the lowly Pesicha? I should be getting the most prestigious aliyah. As awkward as it was, and as people were rather awkwardly squirming in their seats, and this fellow barking at the Gabbai that he got such a undesirable aliyah, the Gabbai sat there quietly, waiting, kind of humming and ohing and waiting, and I could have and I should have. I'm sorry. And as Rabbi Wein watched this episode, he writes that he thought to himself, I did have a drusha prepared to speak about something else, but this response must be addressed. There's a problem here. So Rabbi Wein, off his cuff, wanted to be able to direct a drusha to this fellow, but not make him feel bad. He didn't want to walk over to him in the middle of the community, for that would obviously not be of any positive effect. What's the likelihood he would listen to rebuke? So the whole drusha would be made up. Sources all coming together to address this fellow's issue and how he should improve. But it would be masqueraded by a happy, nice talk directed to the audience so as not to embarrass the fellow. And sure enough, Rabbi Wein began by describing the greatness of psicha, and anyone who would ever be upset that they got psicha, not pointing any fingers, but one must internalize just how great psicha is, citing the Zohars of how we say Baruch Shemei when we open up the Aron Kodesh because we're opening up the gates of heaven. This is the most prestigious aliyah. And who wouldn't want the greatest aliyah of them all, psicha? Rabbi Wein continued that this Aron Kodesh was protected and adorned by a beautiful curtain, a beautiful parochas that was taken out of the Holocaust when it was placed on top of the door to the gas chambers and somebody grabbed it before. Zeh Hashar Lashem Tzadikim Yuvo, and they remade it. It's almost become this beautiful memorial. Wow, and anyone who gets to open up the Aron Kodesh is so lucky and so blessed. And as everyone's paying attention, it looks, says Rabbi Wein, like his talk is landing. For this fellow is glued and even seems stirred. Sure enough, after davening, this fellow comes running over to Rabbi Wein and he says, Rabbi, that was the most incredible drusha. I heard every word and I'm taking it to heart. From here on out, I will continue and try my best to fight to acquire and make sure that I have the rights to the psicha honor. The fellow missed the boat and just took it that he should continue fighting and fight even more for another honor. This is a prime example of Bishrirus Libi Eilech in our Parsha. This whole episode that somebody listens to a drusha, but may sit there and soak up the words of wisdom, but somehow think it's not applicable to him, or I'm good and how can I use this to my benefit? It is the easiest way to understand Parshas Nitzavim's Parak Chav Tes Pasuk Yud Ches V'Haya B'Shamo as Divrei Ha'Allah. Moshe Rabbeinu's final day. Moshe Rabbeinu is passing the torch to Yoshua. He does a bit of fortune telling, a little bit of coaxing, and a little bit of some delivering of the two final mitzvos, our double parsha this week, Nitzavim-Vayeilech. And one of the most blunt statements that it will be that after you hear all of these curses, this entire covenant, all that it is to be Jewish, and the response by the Almighty based on your actions, and maybe you should say, dear congregation, V'hisborich belavavo lemor shalom yi eli. That maybe you will say in your heart, that peace unto me. Ki b'shriros Libi Eilech. That you will think in your heart, that peace will be with me. I'll do what I think is fine, for the talk that's being delivered doesn't apply to me. Shalom yi eli. Ki b'shriros Libi Eilech, I'll go with the sentiment of my heart. I won't hold myself back from any of my pleasures, because all of this, all of the curses that should be applied in the books of the prophets, in the books of Moses, to a person that doesn't listen, that's not talking about me. Fighting for psicha? Maybe I should even embrace this to further my inappropriate passions. It's important that by every word of Moshe's rebuke and Moshe's fortune telling, we take it to heart. For I even caught myself today in reading Moshe's words to be thinking that, oh, Moshe must be discussing this part of the Gullus. Moshe's trying to emphasize to Klal Yisrael not to do this. But never did it cross my mind that V'haya b'shamayik es divrei ha'ala azayis v'izbarach b'lavavai leimer shalom yi eli ki b'shrius Libi Eilech, that I'm good, I don't need to improve. It's not referring to me. I never once thought that, wait a second, all of this is talking to me, for I am a Jew. And Moshe is giving me his guidance for how to make it until that ultimate reveal of Mashiach. So I want to make sure that at the end of this pasuk, we fully internalize that the lesson is talking to us and to no one else. Moshe Rabbeinu is telling over that Jewish people, do not be like that fellow, the snowbird that imagines that this whole Musar's talk is really devoted to Pliny or to Moshe, but not to me. And the verse continues, the pasuk finishes. Leman sefos harava es hatzmeya. Very complex words. Do not be this fellow, for lest leman sefos harava es hatzmeya. To add for you the unintentional sins on the intentional sins. That's how Unkeles translates it. Rashi seemingly does the same thing. Harava es hatzmeya seems to be referring to, if you choose to not take this to heart and be like the fellow that says that Torah is not applicable to me, this whole Musar thing isn't discussing me, it's not my fault, I'm fine, I'm going to do what I want, then God views any of your unintentional, accidental sins as intentional. And he heaps the blows upon you because you have literally decided that the whole thing isn't applicable to you, and therefore your unintentional sins really are intentional because of your initial mentality that the whole thing doesn't have to do with me. So really everything after that could be deemed intentional. But it is here that I'd like to show you one of the Rambans that truly is one of those Rambans that shook the world, and that someone, anyone, everyone in us needs to remind themselves of constantly. And might we even suggest, articulate, that this Ramban foretold what would happen in America, how society would become immorally corrupt rather quickly, and how to steer clear of that and keep society morally proper. Says the Ramban. I'll tell you what this pasuk means. Leman sefos harava es hatzmeya. The words literally mean harava es hatzmeya. They're words that rava means content, quenched, properly filled. Ramban proves this. V'ravisi nefesh hakohanim deshen, v'ha'isa nafsham kigan rava, full. Satiety. But sama, tzme'a, that means thirsty. Somebody that wants more, and specifically in a liquid form. Sama nafshi lilokim. As David HaMelech said, I'm thirsty for Hashem. It's talking about a lust. Talking about a true inclination, a true drive, urge, temptation for something. It's remarkable to see here just how much David HaMelech loved Hashem and wanted to be righteous. But the word itself means temptation and lust. Thirsty for more. Says the Ramban, that this fellow who decides to go by the happiness and songs of his heart to fulfill all pleasures, ki nefesh ha'adam harava she'einenu mis'avel ledvarim haroim. A person is naturally content. He doesn't need more. He has everything that he needs based on God giving it to him, air, water, bread. It's all very basic and very easy. Life is simple. Kasher tavo b'libo ksas taiva. But when a person will indulge a little bit, some taiva, something extra, v'uyamali ta'avaso, and then he fills that thirst, quenches that desire, as Yosef benafsho taiva yisera. Then the level needed to quench your desires increases. V'tiya tzamea, you now become even more thirsty. Ma'od, la davar ahu, for this thing she'achal that you ate, she'asa yoser miberishona, you become even more thirsty. V'tisave od l'dvarim roim, you want even worse things, putrid foods, putrid desires, shalei haisa mas'ava lehem mitchila, that you never even wanted at the beginning. The Ramban tells us that Hashem increases the level needed to quench your desires. Hashem increases it. The mitzias is the DNA of a person is that it increases. One needs more if he goes out of his way to fulfill his thirst. The verse should read, Laman Safos Harava, in order to add, increase the quenching on the thirst. Because when a person indulges, it's like a gateway drug. Taiva is backwards. When you see something and you want something that's out of your own normal realm of happiness and contentment, and then you go to acquire that pleasure, the next time you may get a similar high from that taiva, but not the same. You need a little bit more. Says the Ramban. And listen here to the description of America in 2024. If one has a taiva for immoral relationships, for the other species, man, woman, woman to man, man to woman, but if he indulges in it for long enough and constantly seeks to fulfill this immoral passion, what happens next? When he's shituf bezimason, eventually it leads to taiva lavo ala zachar, to same gender marriages and relationships, va'ala behema, into bestiality. The kayotza bezen, to other odd taivos, the shara taivos. Because it takes more of an odd desire, a creation of an odd desire, something else, because the guardrail, the yardstick of measuring the taiva that one needs to quench his thirst is laman tzvais harava es hatzmeya. It needs more because it becomes increased when you fulfill the taiva. Taiva is unlike anything else in the world. Because everything else in the world must be, if you should satisfy it, pay your rent, it's then over until the next due date. You should need to take care of your bodily health issues. You fulfill them and then it's over. You fill up the cup and it's over. But not in taiva, not in lust. As soon as you masbi'o, as the Gemara in Sukkah says, you satisfy it, ra'av, it gets hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. It's like feeding this little devil. But my revi'oi, if you should starve it, sova, then it's backwards and you will feel full and content because you haven't expanded your horizons into zachar and behema, into odd, unappreciated or previously unsought after taivos, but now it's something different and something new that I need to quench my inappropriate thirst. Moshe Rabbeinu tells us that the person that doesn't take this musar to heart will end up in very, very funny places. And this gateway drug will bring him to want things that he previously does not want. It hit me this past week. A couple different things that I enjoyed in the physical world or noticed in the physical world that they may not have been, I don't believe them to be inappropriate or out of the guidelines of Torah. But I just noticed in the grocery store, I purchased it, it was delicious. But I question it now. Have you seen this? When you make a sandwich with bread, they have now crustless bread. Crustless bread. Because we love bread, but how can we do it better? How can we indulge more? It's not usser. But my point to portray is that when we deal with the area of life temptations and wants, one must approach with precision and caution because of what comes next. Because the nature of everything is that once we enjoy, we want more. And you end up from regular bread, but then that doesn't scratch the same itch in the sandwich, to extra crunchy peanut butter with extra jelly jam and extra crustless crust or extra crustless bread. Because it slowly grows. And I love how in Jewish history, we're thousands of years old here, but when you compare more recent times of Jewish history, let's say the Vilna Gaon about 200-300 years ago, that's the very beginning, the inauguration, the inception of American history. The Vilna Gaon was alive, I believe, at around the same time as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and John Hancock and Benjamin Franklin. While they were signing the Declaration of Independence, Vilna Gaon was learning Torah with angels and saving the world. A couple thousand miles away. But in just 300 years, look at where we're up to. In a democracy where there is no right and wrong, because we're a nation governed by the people, but the nature of people is to indulge. But then it doesn't stop. And new rules must be created to allow new indulgences, because they're not the ma'an tzvais harava es hatzmeya. We must allow same-gender marriages, because when someone never knows how to quit or to stop or to master self-control, even put a little bit of some brakes on his temptations, the Ramban says, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes zachar, then comes behema. Same-gender marriages and bestiality, you can bet your bottom dollar, will be next. Because it doesn't end. The sad part is that our Parsha tells of how one should make sure that even though you've seen some really bad idolatry in the next nation over, we were on the way out of Egypt, but you saw and met some people that weren't doing the right thing. You saw some grotesque idol worshipers, but be sure, do not act like them. And Rabbi Yerucham wants to know, don't act like them? What do you mean? You told me that they're gross. We saw that they're gross. They're excreting upon idols, oivid bal pa'ar, doing horrible sins. We saw that it's gross. It's obvious. So why do I need to be warned again, doubly warned, and then signing a pact all over again to make sure that I don't fall into the poor habits of those that are engaging in grotesque actions? Of course we won't do that. But Rabbi Yerucham says, because the number one sakana for a person and his honest driving force is that he always wants to fit in. You don't want to be the outcast, the odd man. You want to have honor. You want to feel high end. You want to feel accepted. You don't want to be different and weird. And as Jews, we are different, although we are not weird. But it can feel when you're surrounded by everyone else doing something different, it can feel like we are acting in an odd way, perhaps even, God forbid, weird. And you may want to engage in the weird and disgusting idol worship practice just for the sake of fitting in, because that's what 99.9% of the world does. So a new commitment is needed to not follow in the ways of how fitting in is done, to be like everyone else. And the man suffice harava es hatzmeya, and not trying to follow in the ways of other people. I don't think we're off base if we say that maybe we are at times trying to fit in with the other nations in our pursuit of pleasure. You find even in Jewish circles ridiculous indulgences that seem to be way off base and not part of our culture, not part of the brand that we represent, and definitely not one of the prominent stops on the highway up to Gan Eden. The amount of money used not for righteous things, but instead for pleasure seeking, it feels like we need a new pact, a new commitment with Hashem, because we recognized that even though we've seen how other nations may spend their money and what they may put on a pedestal, but we're well aware that we're different, but we're not the weird ones. And we're well aware that when we do follow other nations, then Laman Safos Harova Es Hatzmeya, then the taiva never ends, and then hit needed to scratch that temptational itch is much, much more. And without sugarcoating it, we definitely have our own fair share of sins. All of us should take to heart that Moshe isn't just speaking to the nation that was in the desert, but speaking to us. Don't think Kibishuras Libi Eilech, it's not talking to me. Don't think that even though I see other nations, but I don't really want to be like them. Fitting in and even wanting to fit in society is one of the oldest desires known to mankind. Unless we get a grip on it and stop wanting to mimic others, instead want to mimic what it says in the Torah, we'll end up like the Jews of France when Napoleon took over and basically said Jews are allowed to do anything and be anything, which is to quickly assimilate and move the Torah down ranks. Or maybe we'll just be like the Talmidim of Mendelssohn, Moses Mendelssohn, that made the adjustments and modernized things so that we could fit in and have prestige, not be such outcasts, and have everything. But ultimately, it ended with nothing. L'man tzvais harava es hatzmeya. One needs to be on alert that although things aren't necessarily prohibited, but it can become a gateway for the prohibited very, very quickly. I was shocked, appalled, stunned, dumbfounded, and stupefied. My last Svarim store trip, just to see how that's made its way into mitzvah observance. People will claim Zek Keli Va'anveyu, that I'm glorifying the mitzvah, and then do all sorts of crazy things. I've seen tefillin bags instead of just normal pictures of Hashem or pictures of a crown, pictures of tefillin, holy words, your name. Putting on crazy things. Fur. Not necessarily prohibited things. I just recently saw it literally looked like an entire deer. Shaggy skin and hair all there to beautify the mitzvah. And it's not prohibited. But it just hit me as it seems to be like dangerous territory. If we fully let ourselves, b'shvirus Libi Eilech, to fit any passion that we have into the Torah, because quickly the next hit that we need needs to be a bit further, and maybe that's, God forbid, outside the Torah. One needs to have his passions in check and know that taiva is a gateway drug. And know that the more that he tries to quench his taivos, his desires, the more he will feel at peace and won't want gross food, gross relationships. And the more that he chooses to indulge and to scratch the itch, the worse it will get. The psak, the halacha psak, the hashkafa psak is clear. That you take everything that you need from this world, but not extra. Could be that you need a lot. It could be you need a fancy car, and then that's not taiva because it's needed to serve Hashem happily. Sometimes we need nice food, nice drink in order to remain happy, and that's not taiva. But when it goes too far, and you can use your own imagination and give your own examples, and you have to be scared about what comes next. Because the matzvais harava es hatzmeya, that the Baal Taiva, his quenching level increases with his thirst and his quenching of the thirst. Be on the lookout for this. Protect against this. Don't say that Moshe is not talking to me, but instead, take it to heart. And for the whole coming year, commit to take as much as you need from the world. But be careful not to go too far. For if, God forbid, this gateway drug does get a hold of us, the results get pretty ugly.
Kilam kedoshim